There are moments in life when families grow quiet in ways that are difficult to explain. The silence does not always come from peace, and it does not always mean that everything is fine. Sometimes people carry emotions they cannot easily express, and those emotions settle into ordinary conversations, small pauses, and hesitant smiles. A person may sit at the dinner table, answer every question normally, and still feel overwhelmed by thoughts they have not shared with anyone. Another person may laugh louder than usual, just to hide the weight they have been carrying for months. These moments are not always signs of betrayal or danger. More often, they are signs that people are human, complicated, and afraid of being misunderstood. Families are filled with love, but they are also filled with unfinished conversations, hidden worries, and memories that linger long after certain moments have passed. There are certain periods in life that seem to stay with us more strongly than others. A specific month, a conversation, or a season can quietly attach itself to our emotions without us realizing it at first. You may think back to a particular time and wonder why it still feels heavy in your mind, while other memories fade naturally. Often, the reason is not because something terrible happened, but because emotions were left unresolved. People made choices quickly, avoided difficult conversations, or convinced themselves that silence was the easiest solution. What was never fully discussed begins to linger beneath the surface. Over time, those unresolved emotions shape the way family members speak to one another, the way they avoid certain subjects, and the way they react when old memories return unexpectedly. Many people believe that fear always looks dramatic, but in reality fear is often quiet. It can appear in the form of hesitation before answering a simple question. It can show itself when someone changes the subject too quickly, or becomes unusually distant after hearing a familiar name or memory. Fear can also come from guilt, regret, or uncertainty. A person may replay old decisions in their mind, wondering whether they handled a situation correctly. They may ask themselves if they should have spoken sooner, been more honest, or made a different choice entirely. The longer those thoughts remain hidden, the heavier they become. Yet even then, most people are not trying to hurt others intentionally. They are often trying to protect themselves from conflict, disappointment, or emotional pain. In families, people sometimes convince themselves that avoiding the truth is the same as protecting the people they love. They tell themselves that silence keeps everyone safe, and that difficult conversations will only create unnecessary tension. At first, this may even seem true. Life continues moving forward. Everyone keeps smiling, attending family gatherings, and acting as though nothing unusual happened. But emotions rarely disappear simply because they are ignored. They remain present beneath the surface, shaping relationships in subtle ways. Trust becomes uncertain without anyone openly admitting it. Certain topics begin to feel uncomfortable for reasons no one fully explains. Small misunderstandings grow larger because the foundation underneath them was never completely honest. There is also a strange way that memory works inside families. The same event can be remembered differently by different people. One person may recall it as a harmless misunderstanding, while another remembers it as a painful turning point. Neither perspective is always entirely wrong. Human beings naturally shape memories around emotion, fear, and personal experience. This is why old stories sometimes change depending on who is telling them. A family member may leave out details because they genuinely believe those details no longer matter. Another may avoid speaking about the past because revisiting it feels emotionally exhausting. Sometimes people are not protecting secrets as much as they are protecting themselves from reliving emotions they never properly processed. As time passes, however, unresolved situations often begin to reveal themselves naturally, not through dramatic confessions or shocking discoveries, but through small moments of realization. A conversation suddenly makes more sense years later. A detail that once seemed unimportant begins to connect with other memories. You start understanding the emotional distance between certain people. You recognize why someone acted defensively, or why another person withdrew emotionally during a difficult time. Clarity does not always arrive in a single moment. Sometimes it unfolds slowly, allowing you to see relationships with greater maturity and compassion. When this happens, it is important to remember that understanding the truth about a situation does not automatically mean assigning blame. Families are built on imperfect people, trying their best, while carrying fears, insecurities, and emotional wounds of their own. Someone may have made a poor decision, not because they were cruel, but because they were overwhelmed. Another may have hidden information, because they feared confrontation, or believed they were protecting someone they loved. None of this excuses dishonesty, but it does remind us that human behavior is rarely simple. Most emotional conflicts exist in shades of gray, rather than clear categories of right and wrong. There are times when people become more observant without fully realizing it. You begin noticing patterns in conversations, changes in tone, and moments that once escaped your attention. This does not mean you are becoming suspicious or paranoid. Often, it simply means you are growing emotionally aware. As people mature, they naturally start recognizing emotional undercurrents within relationships. They become less satisfied with surface-level explanations and more interested in understanding why certain dynamics exist. This awareness can feel unsettling at first because it changes the way you view people you have known your entire life. Still, awareness should not lead to fear. It should lead to understanding. The purpose of truth is not always to destroy relationships or expose someone publicly. Sometimes, truth exists to help people heal honestly, rather than continue pretending everything is perfect. A difficult conversation, handled with patience and empathy, can repair years of emotional distance. Even when trust has been shaken, openness can create the possibility for rebuilding it. Families grow stronger, not because they avoid mistakes, but because they eventually learn how to face them together. One of the hardest things about unresolved emotions is that they influence behavior in subtle ways. A person carrying guilt may become overly defensive during harmless conversations. Someone hiding regret may avoid eye contact without even realizing it. Another person may try too hard to maintain normalcy because they fear that emotional honesty will change how others see them. These reactions are deeply human. Most people are not skilled at carrying emotional burdens gracefully. They stumble through them quietly, hoping time will soften the weight of what they feel. At the same time, the people around them often sense that something feels incomplete, even if they cannot explain why. Families are emotionally connected in ways that go beyond words. A change in energy, tone, or closeness can be felt long before it is openly discussed. This is why unresolved situations rarely stay hidden forever. The truth has a natural tendency to rise slowly through conversations, memories, and emotional patterns. It does not always explode dramatically. More often, It reveals itself through understanding that grows over time. When old memories return, people often react differently depending on where they stand emotionally. Some become nostalgic and reflective. Others become quiet or uncomfortable. These reactions are not always signs of guilt. Sometimes they are signs of pain, embarrassment, or sadness connected to a period they struggled through privately. It is easy to assume the worst when someone avoids a subject, but avoidance can come from many emotional places. A person may fear disappointing others, they may fear reopening conflict, or they may simply fear being misunderstood after carrying something alone for so long. This is why compassion matters during moments of realization. Discovering that someone kept emotions hidden or handled a situation poorly can hurt deeply, especially when trust is involved. Yet reacting only with anger often pushes people further into defensiveness. Understanding does not require ignoring your own feelings, but it does allow room for honest communication. Sometimes, the people we love disappoint us not because they lack love, but because they lack the emotional courage to face difficult truths directly. There is also an important difference between secrecy and privacy. Every family has private struggles that are not shared openly with everyone. Privacy can be healthy and respectful. Secrecy becomes harmful only when it damages trust or prevents honest connection. Many people confuse the two because they fear vulnerability. They convince themselves that staying silent protects relationships, when in reality, emotional honesty is what allows relationships to grow stronger over time. As you reflect on past experiences, it helps to approach memories with balance rather than suspicion. Not every strange moment points toward deception, and not every emotional shift hides a terrible truth. Human beings are constantly navigating stress, pressure, personal fears, and emotional exhaustion. Sometimes people act differently simply because they are struggling internally in ways they do not know how to explain. The goal is not to search for hidden wrongdoing everywhere. The goal is to understand relationships more clearly and communicate more honestly moving forward. Growth often begins the moment we stop accepting easy explanations for emotional distance. That does not mean becoming confrontational or distrustful. It means becoming willing to ask deeper questions with kindness and maturity. Healthy relationships are built through conversations people are often afraid to have. They require vulnerability, patience, and the willingness to listen without immediately judging. In many cases, what seems like betrayal at first may actually be a complicated mixture of fear, regret, and emotional confusion. People change over time as well. Someone who avoided honesty years ago may now deeply regret their choices. Another person who once seemed emotionally distant may simply have lacked the tools to communicate properly. Families are constantly evolving because the individuals within them are evolving too. This is why old wounds sometimes reopen later in life. Not because the past itself changed, but because people finally become emotionally ready to understand it differently. There is a quiet strength in choosing clarity over confusion. Clarity does not mean uncovering every detail or forcing every secret into the open. It means recognizing emotional truths honestly. It means admitting when relationships have shifted, when trust has been tested, or when communication has failed. Most importantly, it means deciding whether those relationships can heal through honesty rather than avoidance. Healing rarely happens all at once. It begins through small moments of openness, One honest conversation can change the direction of an entire relationship. One apology spoken sincerely can release years of emotional tension. Even acknowledging that something felt unresolved can create space for understanding that never existed before. Many families spend years pretending everything is fine, while quietly longing for someone brave enough to speak honestly and gently about what everyone already feels. At the heart of every difficult family situation is usually the same desire, the desire to be understood without losing love. People fear honesty because they fear rejection. They worry that once the truth is spoken, relationships will break permanently. Yet in many cases, the opposite becomes true. Honesty may create discomfort at first, but it also creates authenticity. It allows relationships to rest on something real, rather than fragile performances held together by silence. It is also important to recognize your own emotional instincts without allowing them to consume you. If certain memories continue resurfacing, there may be unresolved emotions connected to them. But unresolved emotions do not always require dramatic conclusions. Sometimes they simply ask for reflection, communication, and emotional closure. You do not need to approach your family with suspicion to seek understanding. Calm conversations, thoughtful questions, and emotional patience often reveal more truth than confrontation ever could. Every family carries stories that were never fully told. Some stories involve sacrifice that went unnoticed. Others involve mistakes people hoped time would erase. Some involve misunderstandings that quietly changed relationships for years. What matters most is not whether a family is perfect, but whether the people within it are eventually willing to grow beyond fear and silence. Real connection requires honesty, even when honesty feels uncomfortable. There comes a point in many relationships when pretending no longer works. People become tired of avoiding certain topics or hiding emotions behind routines. This moment can feel frightening because change always creates uncertainty, yet it can also become the beginning of something healthier. Emotional truth does not always destroy relationships. Sometimes it saves them from becoming emotionally empty. The past cannot be rewritten, but understanding can reshape the meaning we attach to it. A painful memory may begin to make sense once you understand the fears and emotions surrounding it. Someone you once viewed harshly may appear more human when you recognize the pressure they were carrying. This does not mean forgetting your own hurt. It simply means allowing room for complexity, rather than reducing people to a single mistake. In the end, the most meaningful truths are rarely the dramatic ones. They are the quiet realizations that help us see each other more clearly. The understanding that someone was afraid, overwhelmed, or emotionally lost can soften years of confusion. The realization that honesty matters more than comfort can transform how a family communicates moving forward, and the recognition that love and imperfection often exist side by side can create deeper compassion than silence ever could. Life continually moves people toward greater awareness, whether they are ready for it or not. Relationships change, memories resurface, and emotional patterns become clearer with time. But awareness should never be used as a weapon. It should be used as an opportunity to build healthier connections, grounded in honesty, empathy, and emotional courage. Families do not heal because they avoid difficult truths. They heal because, eventually, someone chooses understanding over fear and conversation over silence. July created a fracture. It may involve loyalty, money, words spoken behind your back, or a decision that affected you without your consent. Whatever it is, it sits beneath the surface. influencing present-day behavior, and the longer it stays hidden, the heavier it becomes. You are not imagining the tension, you are sensing the truth before hearing it. What happens next will not feel loud at first. It will feel like realization, like a quiet click in your mind, where things finally line up. When that happens, the fear you sense in someone else will make sense too. The truth about July is not coming to shock you, it is coming to free you from confusion. Someone in your family knows this moment is close. They are watching your reactions. They are measuring their words. They are hoping time will save them, even though time is doing the opposite. This is not about blame. This is about awareness. And once awareness arrives, it cannot be taken back. Stay present. The surface is beginning to crack. There is a quiet moment approaching, when what has been avoided will begin to speak on its own. You will feel it before you hear it, because the energy around you will start to change in small but undeniable ways. Conversations will feel slightly tense. Responses will arrive a little too fast, or a little too rehearsed. Someone in your family is already preparing explanations for questions you have not yet asked. They are doing this because July created a chain reaction that never truly stopped. One decision led to another, and then to another, until the truth became something they felt trapped inside. Right now, they are afraid because circumstances are no longer fully under their control. Something external is shifting, a memory is resurfacing, a detail is coming back into focus, or another person who knows part of the truth is getting closer to speaking. Fear grows when control weakens. That is exactly what is happening. You are standing at the edge of a realization that changes how you see loyalty, honesty, and intention within your own bloodline. What makes this situation powerful is that the truth from July does not live in one single moment. It lives in consequences. It lives in the way certain relationships cooled without explanation. It lives in promises that quietly disappeared. It lives in opportunities that never reached you, even though they should have. Someone decided something for you without including you. They believed they were protecting peace, but in reality, they were protecting themselves. At the time, it felt easier to stay silent than to be honest. Now that silence has grown heavy. The person who is scared knows that once you understand what really happened, you will never look at them the same way. They are not afraid of anger. They are afraid of the shift. They are afraid of losing the version of themselves you believed in. July was when they chose convenience over clarity, and every day since then has been built on maintaining that choice. You may notice that your intuition has become sharper recently. Things that once felt normal now feel slightly off. This is not accidental. When a truth is close to surfacing, awareness rises naturally. You are beginning to notice patterns you ignored before, why certain topics are avoided, why some people over-explain while others say nothing at all, why your presence changes the mood in subtle ways. These are signals. Someone is monitoring how close you are to connecting the dots. They may attempt kindness. They may attempt distraction. They may suddenly bring up old memories that feel unrelated. These are not random acts. They are attempts to steer your focus away from July without directly mentioning it. But the more they try, the clearer it becomes that something is being guarded. Truth does not need defense. Only secrets do. What happened in July involved a moment where honesty was possible, but silence was chosen instead. That silence created an imbalance that you have been carrying without knowing why. You may have blamed yourself at times. You may have felt uncertain, unsupported, or confused about why things unfolded the way they did. The truth will show you that some of that weight never belonged to you. It belonged to someone who made a decision behind closed doors and hoped time would erase its impact. But time does not erase truth. It reveals it slowly. The fear you sense now is the fear of revelation. Someone knows that once you see the full picture, you will understand why certain things never sat right in your heart. And once you understand, silence will no longer work. Prepare yourself for clarity rather than confrontation. The truth about July will not explode. It will unfold, piece by piece, through words spoken carelessly, through reactions that do not match the situation, through details that suddenly matter. When the moment comes, you will not need to argue or accuse. You will simply know. And that knowing will shift everything. The person who is scared understands this. That is why their fear feels urgent now. They sense the ground changing beneath them. You are closer than you realize. The truth is no longer hiding. It is waiting for you to recognize it. There will come a moment when you realize that the truth was never meant to be hidden forever, only delayed until you were strong enough to see it clearly. This is why everything around you has been slowing down emotionally, as if life itself wanted you to notice what you once rushed past. Someone in your family understands this instinctively. They feel the pressure building because the truth from July is starting to leak through cracks they can no longer seal. It shows up in their hesitation, in their sudden seriousness, in the way they react when plans change or when the past is mentioned even casually. Their fear is not dramatic, but it is constant. They know the version of events they protected is weakening, and they know that once you see the full picture, you will understand why certain actions never aligned with the words you were given. What makes this truth powerful is not just what happened, but how it reshaped the emotional landscape afterward. After July, something shifted quietly. Trust became conditional. Transparency became selective. You may have felt a distance you could never explain, a sense that something important was missing from the story you were told. That feeling was real. Someone altered the flow of information, redirected outcomes, or decided what you should and should not know. At the time, they believed it was the right choice, but right choices do not leave behind fear. Only unresolved ones do. Now that unresolved weight is pressing against them, they are scared because the truth threatens the stability they built on omission. They are scared because you are no longer looking away from what feels unfinished. You may notice moments where their emotions do not match the situation. Overreaction to small things, sudden silence when clarity is needed, or unnecessary reassurance when none was asked for. These are signs of someone guarding a fragile narrative. July forced them into a role they did not expect to maintain for this long. Every day since then has required awareness, adjustment, and restraint. That is exhausting, and exhaustion makes mistakes. A name slips, a timeline changes, a detail does not line up. These are not accidents. They are the truth trying to surface through fatigue. You are not imagining these inconsistencies. You are noticing them because you are ready to. As this awareness grows, you will feel less confused and more grounded. That is the shift they fear the most. Confusion keeps people dependent on explanations. Clarity makes explanations unnecessary. Once clarity arrives, you will see how certain outcomes were influenced without your consent, how silence was chosen over honesty, how your trust was managed instead of respected. This realization will not make you bitter, it will make you calm. And calm is powerful. The person who is scared understands that calm awareness cannot be manipulated. That is why they are unsettled. They sense that you are stepping into a space where truth no longer needs permission to exist. Do not rush this moment. The truth from July will not demand urgency from you. It will arrive with certainty. When it does, you will understand why everything unfolded the way it did, and why certain people acted the way they did. Someone in your family is afraid, because they know this understanding will change the emotional balance forever. Not through confrontation, but through recognition. Once you recognize the truth, the silence loses its power, and that moment is closer than anyone wants to admit. There is a strange calm that arrives right before truth becomes unavoidable, and you may already be feeling it without realizing what it means. It is the calm that comes when confusion starts dissolving, and patterns begin to arrange themselves clearly in your mind. Someone in your family senses this shift. They notice that you are no longer reacting the way you used to. You are listening more, watching more, asking less but understanding more. This is unsettling for them, because the truth about July survives only when you doubt yourself. The moment you stop doubting, their silence loses its shelter. They are scared now, because they feel you stepping into a quiet confidence that cannot be redirected. They know that once you fully see what was hidden, explanations will no longer work the way they once did. The truth tied to July is not just about what happened, but about what was allowed to happen afterward. It is about how certain boundaries were crossed quietly, how your voice was absent from decisions that affected you, and how outcomes were shaped while you were kept at a distance. Someone convinced themselves they were acting responsibly, that sparing you the truth was a kindness. But kindness does not create fear, only guilt does, and guilt does not age well. It grows restless, it looks for exits. That is why you may feel sudden emotional shifts around this person. One moment they are overly warm, the next moment they are distant. This inconsistency is not about you. It is about the pressure of maintaining a story that no longer feels secure. July planted a seed of discomfort that has now grown into anxiety. You may soon notice that the truth does not arrive as a single confession, but as a series of realizations that stack together until denial becomes impossible. A remembered conversation suddenly sounds different. A past reaction finally makes sense. A timeline aligns in a way it never did before. These moments will feel quiet but powerful, and when they happen, you will feel something release inside you. That release is clarity. The person who is scared knows that once clarity arrives, you will no longer search for reassurance from them. You will no longer need their version of events to feel stable. This is what frightens them most. Not exposure, but irrelevance. When truth is seen, control fades. What is important now is how you hold yourself through this awareness. You do not need to confront. You do not need to demand. The truth has already begun speaking through circumstances, through emotional responses, through the energy that surrounds certain topics. Someone in your family feels this and understands that the story they protected is reaching its final stage. They may attempt to rewrite details. They may attempt emotional closeness, or they may retreat entirely. None of these actions change what is coming. The truth about July is settling into place, and once it does, it cannot be rearranged. You are not losing anything by seeing it. You are gaining stability. There comes a point in every difficult realization where the search itself finally ends. Not because every question has been answered aloud, and not because someone suddenly admits everything with complete honesty, but because your understanding becomes strong enough to stand without permission from anyone else. That is the place you are entering now. The truth surrounding July is no longer something distant, confusing, or unfinished in your mind. It is becoming settled, quietly, permanently. What once felt uncertain is beginning to organize itself into a clear emotional structure. You are no longer looking at isolated moments and wondering whether they mattered. You are beginning to see how every silence, every delay, every strange reaction, and every emotional shift connected together beneath the surface. The deeper realization is not simply about what happened. It is about recognizing how much energy was spent keeping you disconnected from your own instincts afterward. Someone in your family feels this shift happening inside you, and it unsettles them more than they expected. They can sense that you are no longer emotionally chasing explanations. You are no longer trapped in confusion or endlessly replaying conversations, trying to figure out what was real. There is a stillness in you now that did not exist before. That stillness is not denial. It is awareness finally settling into place. The truth about July has reached a stage where it no longer depends on evidence to feel real. It exists through pattern, through consistency, through emotional recognition. You can feel how everything aligns without needing constant reassurance. And once awareness reaches that point, it becomes impossible to reverse. Someone understands this very clearly. They know the version of reality they tried to maintain around you is beginning to lose its influence. That realization creates fear, not loud fear, not dramatic fear, quiet fear, careful fear, the kind that reveals itself through hesitation, guarded behavior, cautious language, and emotional unpredictability. They understand that once you fully see something, they can no longer shape your interpretation of it. Silence stops working when clarity arrives. You may already notice changes in the atmosphere around this person. Perhaps they watch your reactions more closely now. Perhaps conversations feel more measured than before. Perhaps there is a strange tension beneath ordinary interactions, as though they are trying to determine how much you truly understand. What unsettles them is not confrontation, it is your calmness, because calmness changes power completely. When someone expects confusion, your clarity becomes threatening. When someone expects emotional reactions, your stillness becomes impossible to control. And when someone relies on silence to protect themselves, your ability to understand without their explanation removes the last protection they believed they had. That is why this phase feels different from the earlier stages. Earlier, the truth felt emotional, heavy, unstable. You may have questioned yourself repeatedly. You may have wondered whether you were overthinking, imagining patterns, or reacting too deeply. But now something inside you is stabilizing. Your intuition no longer feels chaotic. It feels accurate. You are beginning to understand that your discomfort was never random. Your instincts were responding to inconsistencies that existed long before you consciously understood them. That recognition changes everything because self-doubt begins to disappear, and once self-doubt disappears, manipulation loses its foundation. The person who is afraid can feel that happening. They know you are no longer depending on them to define reality for you. They know you are no longer accepting incomplete explanations simply to preserve emotional comfort. Most importantly, they know that July is no longer a vague memory you can be redirected away from. It has become a fixed reference point in your understanding. And reference points do not move once they are clearly seen. What is becoming visible now is not just one event, but the entire emotional structure built around it afterward. You are beginning to recognize how certain conversations never happened for a reason, how certain truths were softened, delayed, or avoided, how emotional distance quietly formed after July without ever being directly acknowledged. You can see how outcomes changed around you while you were expected to remain uncertain about why. This perspective does not arrive with rage anymore. That is what makes it powerful. Anger can be dismissed. Emotional reactions can be redirected. But clarity cannot. Clarity simply remains. It does not need to defend itself constantly, because it no longer depends on emotional intensity to survive. The truth about July is reaching that stage inside you now. It is no longer fighting to be believed, it simply exists. And that existence changes the emotional balance between you and the people involved. Someone understands that your relationship with them will never fully return to what it was before. Not necessarily because you will become cruel or distant, but because awareness naturally changes boundaries. Once you recognize certain patterns clearly, you stop participating in them unconsciously. You stop carrying confusion that never belonged to you in the first place. That is what they fear most. Not punishment, not confrontation, consequence. Because consequence does not always look dramatic. Sometimes consequence looks like emotional distance. Sometimes it looks like reduced trust. Sometimes it looks like realizing you no longer need someone's version of events to feel stable within yourself. The closer you move toward full understanding, the more emotionally lighter you may actually feel. That can seem strange at first. Situations that once felt emotionally overwhelming may suddenly feel calm, almost detached. But that is not because the truth matters less. It is because understanding releases the exhausting pressure of uncertainty. Confusion is heavy. Clarity is steady. You are no longer trapped in endless mental loops, asking yourself whether something felt wrong. You already know it did. You no longer feel desperate to gather more evidence. The emotional pattern itself has become the evidence. The inconsistencies explain themselves now without effort. And because of that, the person who is afraid may begin acting unpredictably. At times they may seem unusually kind or emotionally available. At other times they may become distant, defensive, or withdrawn. They may attempt sudden honesty in small ways, testing how much you already know. Or they may avoid emotional depth altogether, because they realize the truth feels too close now. These shifts are not random. They are responses to losing emotional control over a situation that once felt manageable. For a long time, silence protected them, or at least they believed it did. They assumed that with enough time, uncertainty would soften the edges of reality. They believed confusion would eventually replace clarity. But the opposite happened. Silence sharpened the truth instead of erasing it. The absence of explanation forced patterns to reveal themselves more clearly. Now the weight of what was hidden feels heavier than the truth itself. That is why fear is surfacing, because there is a moment when someone realizes that maintaining a false emotional balance requires more energy than honesty ever would have required. And when they look at you now, they can sense that your awareness has already crossed a point of no return. You are no longer searching. That alone changes everything. There is a kind of power that emerges when a person stops emotionally chasing answers. Not aggressive power, quiet power. The kind that comes from finally standing still inside your own understanding. You may notice yourself speaking differently now. Shorter explanations, fewer attempts to prove your feelings, less urgency to convince others of what you know internally. That shift is significant. It signals that the truth about July is no longer unstable within you. It has settled into certainty, and certainty removes emotional dependency from the equation. The person who is afraid can feel that their influence over your perception is fading. They understand that explanations, excuses, or emotional redirection no longer carry the same effect. Once awareness stabilizes, manipulation weakens naturally. This does not mean you suddenly hate the people involved. In fact, what makes this phase so emotionally complex is that your understanding may arrive without bitterness. You are not consumed by revenge. You are not obsessed with exposing anyone publicly. Instead, you are beginning to recognize things with emotional maturity rather than emotional chaos. And that maturity changes the nature of your boundaries. You are no longer reacting impulsively to preserve connection. You are beginning to see where connection cost you your peace. That recognition creates distance naturally, even if nothing dramatic is said aloud. Someone in your family senses this deeply. They know the old emotional dynamic cannot fully survive once you see it clearly, because truth reshapes relationships even without confrontation. You may also begin recognizing how much emotional labor you carried unnecessarily after July, how often you questioned yourself instead of questioning the inconsistencies around you, how often you minimized your instincts to preserve harmony. Looking back, you can now see that your intuition was attempting to protect you long before your mind could fully organize the truth. That realization can feel both painful and freeing at the same time. Painful because you understand how deeply confusion affected you. Freeing because you finally understand that your instincts were never irrational. They were responding to something real beneath the surface. The truth no longer feels like a possibility now. It feels established. And when truth becomes established internally, external confirmation becomes almost secondary. If confirmation comes, it will not feel shocking anymore. It will feel relieving, quietly relieving, like the final piece of something you already understood emotionally falling into place. That moment may arrive through something subtle rather than dramatic, a reaction, a contradiction, a sudden emotional shift, a silence that says more than words ever could. And when it happens, you may not even feel the urge to argue or confront. You will simply recognize it. Recognition is final in a way that arguments are not. Arguments seek change. Recognition accepts reality. That is the stage you are entering now. July is no longer an unresolved shadow following behind you. It has become a point of clarity in your story. A marker that explains emotional distances, changed dynamics, and unspoken tension that once felt impossible to fully understand. You are no longer standing inside confusion trying to survive uncertainty. You are standing outside it now, looking back with perspective. And perspective changes everything. Someone in your family is afraid, because they understand that you no longer need silence to protect yourself from the truth. You can hold the truth calmly now. That calmness removes fear from your side of the situation, but it increases fear on theirs, because once truth exists clearly inside someone, nothing hidden can comfortably survive around them anymore. The final stage of realization is not loud. It does not arrive with dramatic confrontation or emotional collapse. It arrives quietly, almost peacefully, a deep internal knowing, a sense that the search has ended, a feeling that nothing more needs to be chased because understanding has already arrived. That is where you are now. The truth about July no longer moves. It no longer changes shape depending on who speaks. It no longer depends on anyone else's willingness to acknowledge it. It stands on its own now. And once truth stands on its own, silence loses all of its power. Top of form, bottom of form,